Imagine this. You're a self-made millionaire, a CEO, and a guest of honor at one of the most exclusive business galas in the country. Your name is printed on the golden VIP seat in the very front row. But just as you sit down, a staff member leans in and says, "Sorry, sir, you'll need to move." Why? Because a white businessman has just walked in and apparently his presence matters more than yours. Not the room watches in silence as you're humiliated, forced to sit in the back like you don't belong. But what no one knows is that you're not just another guest. You're the single biggest investor in the very company hosting this event. And when you finally take the stage, what you do leaves the entire room frozen. This is the unbelievable true story of Marcus Reynolds, the black CEO who turned public humiliation into the most shocking comeback of the night. Picture this: the grand ballroom of a five-star hotel. Glittering chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, tables covered in white linen, and the air filled with the sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter. It was the kind of event where the most powerful names in business gathered investors. CEOs, politicians, and media figures all under one roof. The gala was not just another dinner. It was one of the most exclusive events of the year. Walking into that room was Marcus Reynolds, a man who had built his empire from scratch. Born in a small neighborhood with limited opportunities, he had faced rejection after rejection. But through hard work, intelligence, and resilience, he had become the CEO of Reynolds Technologies, a billion-dollar tech company changing the world. And tonight, he wasn't just any guest. He was a guest of honor. As Marcus entered, heads turned. His sharp black suit, polished shoes, and calm but confident stride demanded attention. Some admired him, some whispered about him, but all eyes followed as he was guided by an usher straight to the VIP section. His name was printed in gold on the seat card at the very front row. It was a symbol of everything he had achieved, the recognition he had fought for his entire life. But just when Marcus settled into his chair, something unexpected happened. A staff member, wearing a forced smile, leaned in and whispered, "Sir, I'm sorry, but we'll need you to move." Marcus looked up, puzzled. Move? There must be a mistake. This is my assigned seat. He held up the card with his name clearly printed on it. But the staff member insisted, his voice dropping lower. "We've had a change. This seat is needed for another guest." Marcus's eyebrows furrowed. "Another guest? Who?" he asked. But before the staff could answer, an older white businessman strolled up confidently. Without hesitation, he took Marcus's seat as though it had belonged to him all along. The room seemed to hold its breath. Some guests watched in silence, pretending not to notice the humiliation unfolding, while others exchanged knowing glances. The message was loud and clear. Despite his achievements, Marcus was being asked to step aside because someone else, someone who looked the part, was considered more deserving of that seat. It wasn't just about being moved. It was about being dismissed, devalued, and told, without words, "You don't belong here." Marcus sat frozen for a moment, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He wasn't some random attendee who had accidentally wandered into the VIP area. He had been invited, specifically, as one of the most important guests of the evening. His name was printed in bold gold letters on the seat card. Yet here he was, being told to move like he didn't matter. The staff member, clearly uncomfortable, avoided eye contact as he gestured toward the back rows. "We've reserved a spot for you over there, sir." "Over there?" Marcus glanced in the direction the man was pointing. It wasn't just a different seat. It was near the very back, almost in the general admission area. The contrast was humiliating. Marcus's heart raced, not with fear, but with anger. He looked at the businessman now sitting comfortably in his chair. The man didn't even bother to acknowledge Marcus. No apology. No glance, no sign of guilt. He simply adjusted his tie, leaned back, and began chatting casually with the other executives in the VIP section, as if Marcus's removal was nothing. More than routine housekeeping, what cut deeper than the act itself was the reaction of the room. The people around him noticed. They all noticed. Some whispered to each other, their eyes darting toward Marcus with expressions of curiosity or quiet amusement. Others deliberately turned their heads, choosing to pretend nothing had happened. Not a single person stood up to object. Not a single person said, "This isn't right." For Marcus, the insult wasn't just about losing a seat. It was symbolic. That seat represented recognition. It represented all the years he had spent building his company, proving his worth, and breaking barriers in an industry where very few people who looked like him had ever reached his level. And yet, in a matter of seconds, all of that was disregarded. Staff's tone made it worse. It wasn't apologetic. It was firm, as if Marcus should simply accept the decision. The message between the lines was clear. Your success doesn't matter here. Your presence is replaceable. You don't belong at the very front. Humiliation washed over Marcus. His jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. He knew if he reacted angrily in that moment, he would be labeled as emotional or unprofessional. But deep inside, a fire was building. This wasn't the first time someone had underestimated him, but it would certainly be the last time anyone got away with it so easily. Marcus sat in the back section, his hands clasped tightly together, his face unreadable. To anyone glancing his way, he appeared calm, almost indifferent. But inside, a storm was brewing. Most people in his position would have caused a scene, right? Then and there, some would have raised their voice, demanded answers, or stormed out of the building in protest. But Marcus had learned long ago that power is not always loud. True power is often quiet, deliberate, and calculated. He leaned back, in his chair, watching the event unfold on stage, but his mind wasn't on the speeches. It was on every moment in his life that had led him here. He remembered being a boy, sitting in a classroom where teachers told him he wasn't leadership material. He remembered applying for jobs in his early career, only to be told he didn't fit the company culture. He remembered walking into boardrooms where people assumed he was the assistant rather than the CEO. Each insult, each dismissal, each attempt to push him aside had built a fire inside of him. And tonight, when that staff member asked him to give up his VIP seat for someone else, it wasn't just about the seat. It was a reminder of every time he had been told he didn't belong. But here's what the staff didn't know. Marcus wasn't just a guest. He wasn't just another CEO sitting in the crowd. Reynolds Technologies, his company, was the single biggest financial backer of the very organization hosting this gala. Without his investments, the lights in that ballroom might not even be on. The sponsors they bragged about? Half of them had been introduced by Marcus's network. The glamorous stage, the luxury decorations, the catered food, all of it was indirectly funded by his contributions. The irony was staggering. The man they had tried to humiliate was, in fact, one of the most powerful people in the room. As the speeches dragged on, Marcus remained silent, but his silence wasn't weakness. Was strategy. He understood timing. He understood impact. And he knew that if he waited, the moment would come when his voice would carry not just weight, but undeniable authority. To the staff, Marcus looked like he had accepted his fate. But in reality, he was planning something that would turn the entire night upside down. This wasn't surrender. This was the calm before the storm. As the evening's speeches wrapped up, polite applause filled the room. Glasses clinked, chairs shifted, and the atmosphere softened. Everyone assumed the night would continue smoothly. But Marcus knew the moment he had been waiting for had arrived. He rose from his chair at the back and walked slowly, deliberately, toward the stage. His tall frame and steady stride demanded attention, and within seconds, whispers rippled across the room. People recognized him. They knew his face. They knew his name. What was he doing? Marcus reached the stage and politely asked the host for the microphone. Caught off guard, the host hesitated, but then, realizing who Marcus was, reluctantly handed it over. The room went still. Every eye locked on him. Marcus began, his voice calm but firm. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I wasn't planning on speaking tonight, but something happened to me just a few moments ago that I cannot ignore." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some already guessed what he was about to say. "I was invited here as a guest of honor." Marcus continued, "Yet I was told to give up my VIP seat, my assigned seat, for someone else. And I wasn't just asked politely. I was dismissed, brushed aside, as if my presence here held no value." Gasps spread through the ballroom. Executives exchanged worried glances. The staff who had forced Marcus to move stood frozen, pale as ghosts. Marcus's tone sharpened. "What you may not realize is this. I am Marcus Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Technologies, the largest financial partner of the very organization hosting this event. Without my company's support, many of the luxuries you're enjoying tonight would not even exist." The silence was deafening. You could hear a pin drop. "And so," Marcus declared, his voice booming now, "effective immediately, every staff member who thought it acceptable to treat me as less than deserving, who thought my rightful seat could be taken from me, is fired. Not tomorrow, not next week. Right now." The audience froze. The staff who had humiliated him looked like the ground had just disappeared beneath their feet, and Marcus delivered the final blow. "You may take my seat, but you will never take my power. I don't just sit in the front row. I own the front row." The words echoed across the ballroom. Some clapped in awe. Others sat speechless. The businessman who had taken Marcus's seat stared down at the floor, unable to meet his gaze. In one powerful moment, Marcus had reclaimed his dignity and shifted the entire energy of the room. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Clips of Marcus's speech, recorded by shocked guests on their phones, spread like wildfire across social media. By sunrise, hashtags with his name were trending. Some people praised him as a fearless leader who stood up against injustice. Others called him bold, even ruthless. But no one could deny one thing. Marcus Reynolds had shaken the room and sent a message that could not be ignored. News outlets replayed the clip endlessly. Commentators debated the event on talk shows. Blogs and business magazines rushed to cover the story, labeling it a watershed moment in the conversation about race, power, and respect in corporate America. For the company that had hosted the gala, it was a nightmare. Their phones rang nonstop with reporters demanding answers. Sponsors began questioning whether they wanted to be associated with such a scandal. Within days, the organization issued a formal public apology, not just to Marcus, but to everyone who had witnessed the incident. They promised new diversity and inclusion training, revised event policies, and even brought in outside consultants to repair the damage. But for Marcus, it wasn't about an apology. He hadn't spoken up for himself alone. He had spoken for everyone who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or treated as less deserving because of how they looked, where they came from, or what others assumed about them. And that's why his words, "I don't just sit in the front row. I own the front row," took on a life of their own. They appeared on T-shirts, in motivational speeches, in classrooms, and even on posters in offices. To many, Marcus became a symbol of resilience and self-respect, proof that success doesn't just earn you money. It earns you the right to demand dignity, not in interviews afterward. Marcus explained his decision. It wasn't about firing people. It was about accountability. It was about showing that actions have consequences. If I had stayed silent, I would have been sending the message that it's okay to treat people this way. And it's not okay, not for me, not for anyone. Marcus went back to running his company, more respected and admired than ever. But the ripple effects of that one night continued long after the gala lights dimmed. His story reminded millions that true power doesn't come from a seat someone gives you. It comes from knowing your worth and never letting anyone take it away. And that night proved one powerful truth. Respect isn't given because of a seat. It's earned by knowing your worth and never backing down. Marcus Reynolds didn't just reclaim his dignity. He reminded the world that no one can silence you when you know your value. If this story inspired you, make sure to hit that like button. It helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because I've got more powerful stories coming your way that you won't want to miss.